The valley trembled with the predator's roar. In a flash, everything changed. A mother's instincts betrayed by the relentless hunt of survival. The newborn cub lay gasping in the cold, trembling beneath the heavy shadows that crept closer. Its tiny form was a target too fragile for this savage world. The predator's eyes gleamed in the dimming light, hungry, calculating. As the cub's heart raced in its chest, it could feel the approach of death in the air, thick with the scent of blood and fear. The mother moved swiftly, circling protectively, but the storm inside her was far worse than the one outside. The battle for survival had begun. Nothing was guaranteed. Not even life. There was only one truth: kill or be killed. It was a game that no creature could escape. The cub's cry pierced the air as the predator's shadow loomed closer, yet in that cry, there was hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they could fight back. But the odds were against them. The predator's growl echoed in the valley, a low rumble that reverberated through the earth. The cub's fragile body shuddered in response, its tiny chest rising and falling with each desperate breath. The storm overhead was growing violent, the winds twisting and howling as the sky darkened with the weight of the incoming rain. The mother stood vigilant, her eyes never leaving the enemy, her fur slick with rain as she moved ever so carefully. The cub was too young, too weak to understand the severity of its plight. It was still learning to walk, to move, to survive in a world that seemed determined to crush it. Every instinct told the mother to flee, to protect the cub, but there was no escape from the terror that had already taken root in their lives. In the distance, the lioness predator waited, patient, unyielding, a reminder that the hunt was never far behind. A low rumble from the predator's throat sent a shiver down the cub's spine. It could feel the weight of its mother's sacrifice even now. There was no room for softness in the wild. Survival demanded everything. The storm was upon them now. The rain fell in sheets, drenching the valley in an unrelenting deluge. The cub shivered, its tiny form barely visible against the rising water. The mother remained close, her body pressed low to the ground, ears alert, listening for the predator's every move. In the distance, the sound of the predator's growls echoed, a constant reminder that danger was never far away. The cub could feel its body weakening, the cold seeping deep into its bones. It couldn't understand why its mother seemed so distant, so protective. Why did she not just pick it up and carry it away? But survival didn't come with comforting answers. It came with harsh realities. The cub, despite its youth, began to sense the gravity of the situation. It watched its mother carefully, learning to read the faint movements of her body. They would need to survive the night. But could they? The valley was no place for the weak. The predator's growl grew louder, more urgent. It was close now, far too close. The cub's mother, sensing the danger, turned to face the tiny figure behind her. The cub was trembling, its legs unsteady beneath it. The rain pounded down harder, and the ground beneath them became slippery. The mother's instincts flared, her body moving with precision as she nudged the cub behind a rock for cover. Every muscle in her body was tense, her heart racing, but she knew this was only the beginning. She needed to protect the cub at all costs, but it was becoming clear that even her strength had its limits. The storm raged, the predator drew nearer, and with every passing second, the urgency of survival grew sharper. There was no escape from the law of nature. Only those who could fight back would endure. The mother knew it was time for a choice: fight or let go. The roar of the predator shattered the night's silence, an ear-piercing cry that vibrated through the valley. The mother stood firm, her body trembling but unyielding. The cub, still hidden behind the rock, could feel the intensity of the situation pressing down on its fragile form. There was no turning back. The predator's approach was inevitable, and the mother had already made her decision. It wasn't about protecting the cub from the storm anymore. It was about survival in a world where only the strong prevail. With a final glance at her cub, the mother growled low and lunged forward, ready to face the predator. It was a gamble, but it was all they had. The valley roared in response, the fury of nature itself driving the final confrontation. The cub's heart raced as it listened to the battle begin. Would it survive this night? Or would this be the end of its fragile existence? The rain had stopped, but the damage remained. The valley was quieter now, the wind replaced by the faint rustling of leaves. The cub, still unsure of its footing, wobbled as it tried to stand. The mother watched closely, her eyes scanning the horizon, alert for any sign of danger. She stepped forward, guiding the cub with gentle nudges. It was small, frail, and too young for the harshness of the world, but the mother knew this was the only way to survive. She had to teach it to stand, to learn how to move in this unforgiving environment. Every step the cub took was a step closer to survival, though it didn't yet understand the weight of the world pressing down on its tiny shoulders. Each passing day would be a challenge, and each day the cub would grow a little stronger. But for now, it needed to learn the first lesson. Survival was about movement. Without it, there was no hope. The cub's movements were slow, hesitant. The mother remained close, her presence a constant reassurance, yet there was little time for comfort. The valley, although peaceful now, was far from safe. The mother knew predators would be drawn to the scent of the young, and so they had to keep moving. Her instincts told her to find shelter, a safe place where the cub could grow stronger. But the terrain was treacherous, and the further they went, the more dangerous it became. The cub's body was still fragile, too young to understand the magnitude of the risks. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig, sent it into a frantic state of fear. The mother, however, remained calm. She moved with purpose, guiding the cub with each step, teaching it that survival meant never showing weakness. Not in this world. Not in the wild. As the days passed, the cub grew accustomed to the rhythm of survival, though it still faltered often. The mother's watchful gaze never wavered. Her role was clear: to protect, to guide, and, when necessary, to push the cub into situations where it had no choice but to learn. The cub was no longer just a helpless infant, but a growing creature capable of learning from its mistakes. Every moment was a lesson, whether the cub realized it or not. One such lesson came when the mother nudged the cub toward a stream. The cub hesitated at first, its tiny paws hesitant to step into the cold water. The mother's growl was gentle but firm, a silent command that told the cub to trust her. Reluctantly, the cub stepped into the stream, the cold water rushing over its paws. It stumbled, but the mother was right behind it, ready to catch it if it fell. The world was full of dangers, but also opportunities to learn. This was one of those moments. Despite the cub's growing strength, the world around it was becoming more unforgiving. The mother knew that it was only a matter of time before they would face a real threat. She kept the cub close, always aware of their surroundings. One day, as they navigated the forest, a sudden rustling in the bushes caught their attention. The mother froze, her ears flicking back as she listened intently. A moment later, the bushes parted, revealing a pack of hyenas, scavengers, opportunistic and relentless. The mother growled low, her hackles raised. She had no intention of allowing them to come any closer. The hyenas, aware of her presence, stopped just out of reach. A tense standoff followed, each side sizing the other up. The cub, still unaware of the danger, huddled close to its mother, its small body trembling. This would be the first true test of their survival. The standoff with the hyenas felt like an eternity, but it ended with the predator retreating. The cub, though unaware of the danger that had just passed, sensed its mother's shift in demeanor. Her protective stance softened as the hyenas disappeared into the shadows. The cub looked up at its mother, their eyes briefly meeting. In that moment, the cub realized something. The world around them was filled with predators, rivals, and dangers. But it wasn't just about surviving. It was about understanding the threat and knowing when to fight or flee. Cub's journey had only just begun, and the mother's lessons would continue. Each step, each lesson was a building block, forging the path that would lead to survival. But there was still so much to learn, and much more to come. The air grew heavier with each passing day, and the valleys seemed to close in on them. The cub, now a bit older, had gained strength but was still not fully prepared for the perils that surrounded them. The mother's instincts were on high alert. Every sound, every shift in the wind was a potential threat. As the cub's fur began to grow thicker, its movements became more sure, but the valley itself seemed to become more hostile. Predators were drawn to their scent, and even the wind carried the whispers of the unseen dangers lurking in the dense forest. The mother guided the cub with increasing caution, knowing that their safety was only temporary. One wrong step, one careless move, and everything could change. The growing tension in the valley mirrored the tightness in the mother's chest. The cub's survival depended on more than just strength. It needed wisdom that the mother was still trying to impart in the midst of an ever more dangerous world. The silence of the valley was shattered by a distant roar. The cub froze, its body tense as the sound reverberated through the air. The mother's body stiffened beside it, her eyes narrowing with calculated precision. A predator, not far off, was making its presence known. The cub's small body quivered as it instinctively pressed against its mother. The lioness, with her years of experience, knew exactly what the roar meant. It was a signal, a challenge. Another predator had entered the territory, and the fight for survival was about to escalate. With a quick glance, the mother motioned for the cub to follow closely. The cub's heart raced, its instinct to run battling with its desire to stay close to its protector. But the mother was firm. There would be no hiding now. The cub would learn quickly, or it would perish. The lesson was clear: strength was not enough. It was the will to survive that mattered most. As they moved deeper into the valley, the environment seemed to close in around them. The dense underbrush made every step difficult, and the cub, though stronger, still struggled to keep pace. The mother's pace was steady and deliberate, her senses heightened. She was aware of every sound: the rustle of the leaves, the snap of a twig, the distant call of birds. The cub, though exhausted, pushed on, its small form determined to follow its mother. Every so often the cub would pause, its tiny head swiveling to check the shadows, the fear still fresh in its mind. The mother would look back, her eyes soft but commanding, urging the cub forward. But with every step, the forest became more hostile. The air was thick with tension, and it wasn't long before the cub felt the weight of the danger pressing in from every direction. The predator was closing in. The mother's heart raced, her instincts screaming to protect her cub at all costs. There was no room for error. The tension in the valley reached its peak when the predator emerged. The mother had known it was only a matter of time before the threat revealed itself. But even then, the sheer presence of the creature was overwhelming. It was a large, formidable male lion, with a dark, thick mane that framed his face like a crown of shadows. He was powerful, his every movement radiating dominance. The mother stood her ground, instinctively positioning herself between the cub and the male lion. She wasn't afraid, not for herself, but for the cub. She knew this would be a battle of wills, a test of everything she had taught the cub. The male lion's growl echoed through the valley, a challenge. The mother responded with a low, guttural growl of her own. The cub, though terrified, pressed closer to its mother. It was time for the lesson to be learned. The battle unfolded with primal ferocity. The mother lunged first, her claws extended, but the male lion was faster, his jaws snapping in a powerful arc. The cub, unable to fully understand the chaos, crouched low behind the rocks, watching the struggle. The ground beneath them shook with each clash, each growl reverberating in the air. The mother fought with everything she had, her body moving with precision and speed. But the male lion was a force of nature, his strength overwhelming. Still, the mother would not relent. She would not allow the cub to witness weakness. She would not fail. Her claws scraped across the male lion's side, drawing blood, but he retaliated with a powerful swipe. The struggle was a brutal dance, one that would determine the fate of them all. The battle between the mother and the male lion seemed endless, each roar of the two predators shaking the valley to its core. But in the midst of their fight, something unexpected happened. The male lion faltered, his powerful frame stumbling for the briefest moment. The mother, sensing her moment, lashed out one final time. But instead of retreating, the male lion stopped in his tracks. His eyes, once filled with rage, softened. The growl that had once been a weapon of power now held something else: pain. The mother, panting from the fierce battle, paused. Her instincts told her something had shifted. She wasn't just fighting a rival, she was fighting a creature that too had a stake in survival. The revelation was staggering. The male lion, it seemed, was not the ruthless predator she had thought him to be. Something deeper, something personal was driving him. She could see it now. The battle wasn't just for dominance. It was for survival. The male lion's growl slowly faded, and his posture softened further. He turned slightly, revealing a deep scar across his chest. The mother, still cautious but sensing a shift, moved closer. She had spent her life fighting for survival, but she had never encountered anything like this. The male lion was not just an enemy, he was a survivor, marked by the same harsh world that had shaped her. The cub, still hidden behind the rocks, began to step out cautiously, its small body trembling but filled with curiosity. It was learning the most important lesson of all: not all battles were won with force. Sometimes survival meant understanding the enemy, seeing them not as a predator but as a reflection of its own struggles. The mother hesitated, then took a tentative step forward, her instincts now guided by understanding rather than fear. Perhaps it was time to find a new way forward. The male lion's steps were slow as he retreated a few paces, still eyeing the mother warily. The cub, emboldened by the change, stepped out from behind the rock, its gaze fixed on the male lion. The mother watched with a mixture of caution and curiosity. The cub's instinct to understand its enemy, to study the predator before it, was the most significant lesson of all. In the wild, knowledge was just as vital as strength. The male lion, recognizing the cub's gaze, finally lowered his head, acknowledging the presence of the young one. It was a gesture of peace, of understanding. The mother, though unsure of the true meaning behind his actions, felt the weight of the moment. They were no longer simply hunter and prey. They were creatures bound by the same unspoken rules of survival, their fates intertwined. It was a delicate truce, one forged by necessity rather than choice. The mother lioness and the cub watched as the male lion turned and disappeared into the thick forest. For a long moment, there was silence, a heavy contemplative stillness that settled over the valley. The cub, still processing what had just occurred, looked up at its mother. The mother's eyes, filled with the wisdom of years spent surviving, held a mixture of relief and caution. The encounter had shifted something within her. It wasn't just about brute force. There were times when survival depended on knowing when to fight, when to stand firm, and when to walk away. The cub would learn this, as it would learn all the hard truths of the wild. The mother turned to move forward, guiding the cub with a gentle nudge. There was no time to dwell on the past. Survival required constant movement, constant adaptation. But one thing was certain. The cub had learned a crucial lesson that day. It had learned the true price of fear. The cub, no longer afraid, pressed on with its mother. The lesson of the day had been clear. Survival was not simply about strength or ferocity, but about understanding. The valley was full of dangers, but also full of lessons. And the mother would continue to teach, continue to guide. The predator that had once seemed like an insurmountable threat had shown a different side, one that mirrored the struggles they both faced. The cub would carry this lesson with it as it grew, learning that even the fiercest of enemies might one day reveal the truth of their own fight. The journey ahead would be hard, but the cub was no longer just an innocent, fragile creature. It was learning, growing, and adapting, just as the mother had once done. The valley had grown eerily quiet, the calm before the storm. The cub, now stronger, walked with its mother through the rugged terrain. The atmosphere was thick with tension, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The air was heavy, thick with the promise of conflict. The mother's senses were heightened, alert for any signs of danger. The cub, though more confident now, could feel the shift in the environment. The predator, the male lion, or perhaps another, was near. The quiet of the valley, only amplified the cub's own uncertainty. Every rustle in the wind, every creak of the trees seemed like an omen. The cub instinctively stayed close to its mother, whose body language had shifted. She was no longer just a protector, she was a warrior, ready to fight for the survival of her young. It was not just the wilderness they had to conquer now. It was the forces of fate that seemed to conspire against them. The first sign of danger came suddenly, a shadow darting across the valley floor. The mother's instincts flared instantly, her body going tense. She nudged the cub to move faster, pushing it into the cover of a nearby outcropping. The cub, heart pounding, scrambled to follow. The air was thick with anticipation. The ground trembled faintly beneath them as the predator, the male lion, now closer than ever, prowled through the underbrush. The mother's gaze was steady, her body poised to strike. She had been here before, in the grip of survival, when every muscle in her body screamed to protect her young. But the stakes were higher now. The cub was no longer the helpless creature it had been when they first entered the valley. It had learned to move, to grow, to survive. But would it be enough? Could they survive this final test? The male lion's growl echoed through the ravine, a deep, rumbling sound that sent a jolt of fear through the cub. The mother's heart raced, but she did not show it. She turned to the cub, her eyes fierce but filled with an unspoken understanding. It was time. It was. She had taught the cub everything she could, but this final test would show what it had truly learned. The male lion, now closing in, stood tall in the narrow ravine, his mane rippling in the wind as he glared at the mother. The moment had come. There was no room for hesitation. The mother leaped forward, claws extended, and the battle began. The cub watched in silence, its tiny body trembling, but its gaze locked on its mother. This was the essence of survival. This was the price of life. The earth seemed to shake with each clash, each roar. But the mother's resolve was unwavering. She would not let the cub down. The battle raged on, each strike a test of will and strength. The male lion, though powerful, was growing weary. The mother's movements were sharp, calculated. She had nothing left to lose. As the male lion lunged forward, attempting to land a fatal blow, the mother sidestepped, using the momentum against him. With a swift strike, her claws found their mark, and the male lion staggered back, bloodied and breathless. The cub, still watching from the safety of the rocks, could hardly believe what it was seeing. The mother, despite the odds, had turned the tide. The male lion, now on his knees, let out a defeated growl before turning and retreating into the valley. The fight was over, but the cub had seen something deeper. It had witnessed survival, not just through strength, but through intelligence, courage, and the will to protect. It wasn't just about fighting. It was about outlasting. The cub stepped forward, slowly, its small body still trembling, but its eyes focused on its mother. The battle was over, but the true lesson had just begun. The valley was harsh, unyielding, but it was also a place where strength could be found, not just in the body, but in the heart. The mother, breathing heavily, turned to the cub. The battle was a victory, but it was also a reminder of the price of survival. The cub, though still young, had learned that there would always be threats, always be challenges, but there would also be moments when survival was determined not by force, but by the resolve to keep going. Together, they had made it through this fight. And in this valley, that meant everything. There was no end to the struggle, no end to the fight. But there was one thing that remained clear. The cub was ready for whatever came next. The valley was calm once more, its chaos left behind in the wake of the battle. The mother and cub stood at the edge of the valley, their bodies tired but their spirits unbroken. The cub, still small but now marked by the lessons of the world, stood beside its mother, watching the quiet landscape before them. The air was different now. It felt lighter, as if the earth itself had exhaled in relief. The cub's heart still raced from the battle, but the fear was gone. It had survived, and it had learned. The valley had tested them, but it had also taught them something essential. Survival didn't just mean enduring the fight. It meant knowing when to stand, when to fight, and when to let go. The mother, breathing steadily, looked out across the valley, her eyes softening. There would always be more challenges ahead. But for now, there was peace. For the first time in a long while they could rest. The world would go on, but they had learned to face it together. In the days that followed, the mother and cub moved deeper into the valley, a place that had once felt dangerous, but now seemed familiar. The cub's confidence grew with each step, its body stronger and its senses sharper. The mother, proud but still vigilant, guided the cub through the winding paths of the valley, teaching it everything she knew. The cub's heart had hardened in the fires of battle, and while its innocence was not lost, it was tempered by the harsh reality of their world. They found a small stream, where the mother led the cub to drink, the water clear and cool against the warmth of the sun. The mother paused for a moment, her eyes softening as she looked at the cub. The cub was no longer the helpless infant it had once been. It was becoming a survivor, a creature of the wild. And though the road ahead was uncertain, she knew that the cub was ready for whatever it might face. As the cub's strength grew, so did its understanding of the world. It began to move through the valley with more purpose, no longer afraid of every shadow or every strange sound. The cub's movements became more deliberate, more controlled. It was becoming the creature it was always meant to be. The mother, though proud, knew the journey was far from over. The cub was strong, but it still had much to learn. Every encounter, every challenge, was another lesson. And the valley, with its unpredictable dangers, would always be a place where the cub would be tested. But now, there was a sense of certainty in the air. They had faced the hardest battles together. And together, they had won. The world was not kind, but it was theirs to face. And the bond between mother and cub would carry them forward, no matter what came next. The valley, once a place of constant danger, now felt more like home. The mother and cub had found a rhythm, their bond stronger than ever. They hunted together, trained together, and faced each new day as it came. But the world of the wild was ever changing, and they knew that peace was never permanent. The cub, now nearly full grown, had learned to adapt. It had learned the true price of survival, that strength was not just physical, but mental and emotional. And most importantly, it had learned the bond between them, the love and trust they shared, was the one thing that could never be broken. The mother, though tired, had no regrets. She had done everything she could to prepare the cub. The rest was up to the cub. And as they sat together on a high ridge, looking out over the valley, the mother knew that the future was theirs to face. Together. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley. The mother and cub remained on the ridge, watching the final rays of light fade into the night. The valley had taught them everything they needed to know, that survival was not just about physical strength, but about adaptability, resilience, and the bond that tied them together. The cub, now fully grown, stood tall beside its mother, ready to face whatever came next. There would be other predators, other challenges, but the cub was no longer afraid. It had learned the hardest lesson of all: to survive, you must never give up, no matter what the world throws at you. And with its mother by its side, the cub knew it would endure. The night settled in, and the valley, though still harsh and wild, felt like home. The world had changed, and yet, it remained the same. The valley, once a place of constant danger and struggle, now felt strangely quiet, almost like an old memory that had been carefully preserved in the hearts of the mother and cub. The cub, now a young lion, stood alone on the ridge where they had once watched the sunset together. Its heart beat steadily in its chest, and its eyes scanned the vast landscape below. The mother had gone, a victim of time and the harsh world they lived in. But the cub, now standing tall, felt her presence in every part of the valley, in the wind, the trees, and the very ground beneath its feet. It had learned everything it could. It had been tested, and it had survived. Now, it was ready to carry on. The lesson of survival, of resilience, and of love was no longer just its mother's gift. It was its own. The cub stood taller now, not as a helpless creature but as the force of the valley itself. A distant roar echoed through the valley, a call that could no longer be ignored. The cub's heart skipped a beat as the sound reverberated across the landscape. For a moment, everything went still. The cub's gaze hardened as it turned toward the source of the sound. It was a reminder that in the wild, the struggle never ended. But now, it was not the cub that was at the mercy of the valley. It was the cub that would answer the call. The roar wasn't just a challenge. It was an invitation. The cub knew what it had to do. The valley had shaped it into what it was now, a survivor. It was time to prove that the lessons, the struggles, and the sacrifices had not been in vain. The echoes of the past still reverberated, but the future was its to claim. The cub moved swiftly, its steps confident as it descended from the ridge and into the heart of the valley. Every muscle in its body seemed to hum with purpose, the weight of its past and the lessons learned fueling its every move. The valley was still vast, but now it felt like a place of opportunity. The cub moved through the dense forest, across the rivers, and up the cliffs with ease. It knew the land like the back of its paw. The sounds of the world, the rustling of the leaves, the calls of birds, seemed to blend together in a harmony that was once foreign to the cub, but now felt like its very heartbeat. It was no longer just a survivor. It was the embodiment of everything the valley had taught it. And as it moved forward, it understood that the valley was not just a place of struggle, but a place where one could grow, adapt, and ultimately thrive. The cub's journey led it to the heart of the valley, where the echoes of the past seemed to converge. There, it found a moment of stillness, a place where it could pause and reflect on everything that had come before. The roar had faded, but its presence lingered. The cub looked around, taking in the vastness of the valley, the winding rivers, the towering mountains, and the dense forests. It was all so familiar now, and yet so different. It was as if the valley itself had transformed along with the cub. The wild had shaped it into something more, something resilient, powerful, and untamable. And now, as the cub stood alone, it realized that the journey was not just about survival. It was about becoming one with the land, becoming part of the cycle that sustained everything. The valley had made it who it was, and it was ready to embrace its place in the world. The final moment arrived quietly, almost imperceptibly. The cub, now a full-grown lion, looked out across the valley one last time. The echoes of its past, the lessons learned from its mother, and the struggles it had overcome seemed to fade into the wind. It stood tall, its head raised high as the sun dipped below the horizon. The valley, once a place of constant turmoil, now felt like home. The cub's journey had ended, but its legacy would remain, carried on by the land, by the creatures that roamed it, and by the spirit of survival itself. The roar that had once echoed through the valley now seemed like a distant memory, a reminder that the wild would always carry its own rhythm, its own pulse. But the cub, now a lion, was a part of that rhythm, forever intertwined with the land. The final echo of the wild would always be heard, but now it was a part of the cub, now grown, standing proud and unyielding in the heart of the valley.